Hi, everybody, and welcome back. Today, as you can tell, we're talking about science fiction, specifically 1950s era science fiction, which I've always loved. And one of the reasons why I like 1950s era science fiction is because it's transformative in the way it approached the genre. You know, you have the bug-eyed, green-skinned aliens. You still have that pulp-style fiction happening, and then you have a lot of intellectual social commentary going on, a lot of anthropological, cultural anthropology happening with social criticism and looking at the way people function. And, excuse me, and, you know, it transformed in that decade. That's an amazing decade for the culture, for Western civilization. It's really something that happened post-World War II. Just looking at the 1950s. So before we get to the books, I want to mention some favorite 1950s science fiction films. I'm not going to hold up DVDs or anything. I'll just read you a quick list I put together of my favorites. You know, that if I were going to put in a Blu-ray or a DVD, these are the films I'd watch. Rocket Ship XM, 1950. How about The Day the Earth Stood Still? That's pretty well known. Most of you are familiar with it. 51, The Thing from Another World. Really good stuff. The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. This is a very well-known film. I would be shocked if most of you science fiction viewers haven't seen these films. Invaders from Mars, 1953. Another great one. Really fun. The War of the Worlds. This is the Gene Barry version. I like the Steven Spielberg version too, but this one is really special. H.G. Wells is a very special writer in my library, and that's one of the great science fiction novels of all time, much earlier than this. Great movie, and it holds up really well, even today. Creature with the Atom Brain. This is a childhood favorite. I first saw it in the 60s on television. I have it on DVD. Richard Denning, wasn't Richard Denning in it? He was married to Evelyn Ankers of the Wolfman fame, isn't that right? Creature with the Atom Brain was 1955, the year I was born. This Island Earth, based upon the novel by Raymond F. Jones, who I will be talking about in this episode, although I'll be talking about a different book. And that is a great book, much different than the movie. But the movie and the book are great. So This Island Earth. The She Creature, this is really one of my all-time favorites. This movie is so creepy and so campy that how can you not like it? Take a look at it sometime. It's one of those creepy classics, The She Creature from 56. And of course, I'm following that with Invasion of the Saucer Men. You are familiar with that popcorn movie. It is silly. It has the best alien costume for a movie from the 50s, and there were a lot of really good ones. Invasion of the Saucer Men from 57 is worth your time. Make a bucket of buttered popcorn and just sit down and enjoy the show. It's a popcorn movie. And I Married a Monster from Outer Space, 1958. These all have really creepy elements. They have good hardcore science fiction elements. Many of them are overplayed, but they're fun to watch. Popcorn, science fiction, film, entertainment. Now, that's just a short list. You know, there's 2 or 3 dozen from the 1950s that we could talk about. I'm sure you could put together a list, those of you watching who are science fiction fans. All right, so what I did was I put together a list of my favorite 1950s science fiction books. And in the course of the past year, I have been rereading them. And I reread everything, and it's interesting coming back to it. So let's start out with Asimov, The Caves of Steel, the robot. This is the first in the robot series. And I first read this book in high school. And I liked it, but I didn't love it. And I've not read it since. So I had to actually go out and buy a new copy. Actually, this is last year. I read this when I was in this chair recovering. One of the books I read, and I loved it. I like it more now. You know, we change over time. We're transformative ourselves. You know, we change our tastes. We change our opinions on things. And when I first read this, I was, 16, 17 years old in a very difficult environment. And, you know, I liked it, but, and I'm an Asimov fan, by the way. I consider Asimov top tier science fiction all the way. So this works for two reasons. Well, more than two reasons, but Asimov mixes genres. You have a mystery, a detective mystery, and you have a science fiction, a futuristic science fiction setting, both of which are handled superbly by Asimov, who was an excellent writer, So it has a pulpy feel to it because of the detective elements. He's fusing genres, and it was marvelously entertaining to me, and I actually have a deeper respect for it reading it again after 50 years. Again, first of the Robot series. I'm sure you're familiar with iRobot, his famous collection, which I think I covered sometime on this channel. Asimov, one of the greats, really. So that's, if you haven't read any Asimov, start with The Caves of Steel. All of the books I'm talking about today are in print. So you should have no issue finding them. Now, let's talk about Jack Williamson. Dragon's Island. I have 2 copies of this book, and this is the Popular Library collection. I love the cover artwork. The other copy I have is really a high-grade copy, and this is my low-grade copy. And this is a favorite. Jack Williamson is a favorite. This was, I have my note here, what was the year? This was 1951. This is about Dane Belfast, a scientist who discovers he's part of Homo excellens, and a genetically engineered super race. So we get into genetic engineering here. Jack Williamson was at the forefront of that type of idea. And there's a superwoman in this story, too. Here she is on the cover. It's very pulpy, but it's Jack Williamson, and it's really good. I have to read you the first paragraph, because when you're talking about, this is pulp fiction, but it has an intelligent mind behind it. It's not just mindless adventure story with square-jawed heroes. And that's the issue with the 1950s science fiction. It transforms itself into an intellectual exercise. But this is a pulp opening. I love it. The city snarled. Its sudden hostility was a bitter taste and a biting scent of menace, and a livid glow of danger over everything he saw, and cold peril crawling up the back of his neck. Though his ears heard no warning, alarm crashed inside his brain. So there you have one of the pulpiest opening paragraphs of Jack Williamson's career. Anyways, this is a really good adventure story. It is hardcore science fiction with a lot of the masculine action that was popular with the pulp fiction writers for many decades. I like Jack Williamson. He's written better books than this. We're going to get to another one, but this is a good book. All right. So that was Dragon's Island from 51. Then I'm going to recommend Robert A. Heinlein, The Green Hills of Earth. This edition compiles, this is a short story collection, and this edition compiles another short story collection, The Menace from Earth, from 59, and The Green Hills of Earth was 51. I couldn't find my original edition, my paperback of The Green Hills of Earth. So these are short stories, and this is Heinlein taking on, he had a military background. So quite a lot of his stories have a military feel and a military setting. No exception here. He's taking the long watches in here, by the way. Some of the stories in here are classics, and Heinlein's a favorite, and it's Delilah and the Space Rigger is the first one. So he's taking the average guy, the average grunt, and he's putting him in a working setting as either a military man or a contractor or doing something in society that needs to be done. It's a different generation. Today's generation doesn't work at all. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. But, he talks about these people, and he puts them in extraordinary futuristic settings. Space exploration is a common day occurrence. These are the best science fiction stories of the 50s, really among the best. I'm sure there are many others I could find that I'm sure I have here. But Heinlein, I wanted to get Heinlein in, and I wanted to do this because The Green Hills of Earth was actually the first of his books I ever read, and I have to include it in a recommendation for your library if you haven't read it. The Green Hills of Earth: The Stories of Heinlein. It's worth your time. Now we're going to get to, I'm recommending Alfred Bester's The Stars, My Destination. Now this is a very famous book. I read this in high school and I didn't like it. So actually a couple of years ago I read it again. I don't know when I bought this particular edition. Let's see if I can tell when this came out. This particular edition would have been 96. So with Neil Gaiman did an introduction. So back in the 90s, I reread this. And I reread it last year. And I like it. I didn't like it in high school. But again, you're talking my opinion on things at the age of 16 was much different than it is at the age of 70. So, we all change. Excuse me. So, Gully Foyle is the brute who becomes something other than that. Again, we're talking about transformative fiction, a transformative genre that became stalwart men against green-skinned aliens, and it became the thinking man's literature, which is what it became known as, speculative fiction during the counterculture revolution of the 60s, where it was transformed yet again. Lots of thesis papers written on the science fiction genre, which makes it all the more fascinating to involve yourself in genre fiction, especially science fiction. So if you haven't read The Stars, My Destination, Alfred Bester, it is an acknowledged classic. I agree with that upon rereading it for the second time in the 90s and then last year. So I'm glad I have it in my library. All right, then we have a really weird book. Jack Williamson again and James Gunn, Starbridge. All right, so this was 55. This book has an interesting story. Jack Williamson wrote the first 50 pages, reportedly, and he got blocked, and he was friends with James Gunn, whom I covered, 3 months ago or something? I covered his trilogy, his final trilogy. James Gunn's a really good writer. Jack Williamson got writer's block, which must be rare for him. And he turned it over to James Gunn, who finished it. And it didn't have a good reception. It wasn't praised initially, but over the decades, it's developed a reputation for being an unacknowledged kind of cult classic. I kind of agree with that. I think it's remarkably fun to read. This is about a hired assassin who's talking about the tubes, that's a tongue twister, isn't it? And I haven't had a pint yet today. Interstellar travel, let me get it out, in this book. It gets a little heady at times, but the pacing, it never lets up, and you get wrapped up in it. And I think that's because both Jack Williamson, who began the story, and James Gunn, who finished it, both would go on to be accomplished writers. Now, Jack Williamson began his career earlier than James Gunn. So I have to recommend it. I like it better now. By the way, this is another one from high school that I don't think I finished it. I think I attempted to read it because it was recommended to me, because I knew a lot of, in the early 70s, I knew a lot of these diehard sci-fi fans, and that was because of Star Trek. Really, Star Trek revitalized the entire genre. And we all know that, right? We can acknowledge that. And I didn't really, at 16, I wasn't there. So later on, you come back to stuff over time. Starbridge. All right, now, I love this book. I really love this book. We were talking about Raymond F. Jones, and Raymond F. Jones wrote This Island Earth, which is a really good book, too. Everything Raymond F. Jones wrote is worth your time. I have a lot of Jack Williamson, James Gunn, and Raymond F. Jones in this overloaded collection here. This is my favorite Raymond F. Jones book. And he wrote a lot of books I'm fond of. So a little history on this one. This was published by the John Winston Company out of Philadelphia. And it's part of their science fiction series. You can see their logo here. This logo appears on all of their books. They put together a series of science fiction They solicited these writers to put these books together for younger readers, or what we would call young adult readers. And there's a whole slew of them. They are all collector's items. I've read a few others. I collect this series. I'll show you more at a later date. And Raymond F. Jones wrote some other ones too. If you're going to collect them, look for the originals with the dust jacket. This is a great, really, really good dust jacket on this. Isn't that beautiful? The year when stardust fell, I have to talk about it. So a comet comes by the Earth, and it has a molecule in it that's in the dust surrounding the comet that enters the Earth's atmosphere. And when the comet dust comes into the Earth, it negates all metallic operations. Automobiles, electricity, but even bicycle riding. The components deteriorate and you can do nothing. That puts civilization back to the starting point. It's really a heavy book. How do you survive? There's no electricity. There's no mobility. Things just don't work. So in order to overcome that, now this is pro-science. This is back in the 1950s, and Raymond F. Jones is talking about the science. So it's a teen book, so the teenager is Ken Maddox in small town of Mayfield, and he's a young scientist. His father is a scientist whom he admires at the nearby university, and they're going to work to try to resolve the issue and come up with a solution to negate that molecule that's affecting Earth and causing all of these problems. Now, what happens to society is society crumbles. It's really heavy. I'm warning you in advance. A bit of a spoiler warning here, Chicago is destroyed. The mobs destroy the city. There's no food production, right? So you have to live off the land. And Mayfield becomes a place where the scientists are working feverishly to come to a resolution. It's riveting, and it does not, spoiler warning, it does not have the soft ending that you would think for a book for young readers. So if you're going to read it, again, that's why I gave you a spoiler warning. The scientists are working feverishly and they make progress, but the ending of the book I felt was kind of ominous. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but it's very realistic. The circumstances in here, there's battles and things that happen, and they're racing against time because humanity is destroying itself, because this molecule has entered the Earth. It's a marvelous plot twist in the book. So The Year When Stardust Fell by Raymond F. Jones is an unacknowledged classic of science fiction from the 1950s. If you get a chance, find it. I believe there's a current edition out there. I believe that there are all sorts of editions out there you can find. It's not hard to find. I have two editions. I have this and I have a paperback edition. I have the first paperback edition, I believe. All right, then we get to a real tough one. Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke. This is a first edition. There he is on the back. I love Arthur C. Clarke. Arthur C. Clarke. Good God, what a writer this man was. This is where science fiction becomes the thinking man's literature, really, with this. 1953. Everything Arthur C. Clarke wrote is thought-provoking. He was a marvelous writer. So if you haven't read this, kind of a heavy book as well. This is about the aliens that come in, the overlords who take over Earth. And humanity has to learn to adapt to what the overlords are asking of us. And the theme here is individuality, or allowing yourself to find a way to adapt to be a progressive race of people. There's no fast and hard answers here, except that in order to transcend the problems that humanity is a higher collective the way to go? A lot of questions here in this book that Arthur C. Clarke puts forward. It's very thought-provoking, and you can read it and decide for yourself how you feel about the way this goes. I think it's a marvelous, intellectual, hard-boiled, classic science fiction novel. I have over here, right here, you can't see it, I have a paperback edition. Let me see if I can grab it. My first paperback edition is this one right here. I mean, this is the first copy of it I read. I collected this later, So, I love Arthur C. Clarke. I really do. So I have to add that to it. Okay, so for this segment of the episode, the final segment here, I chose To the Stars by L. Ron Hubbard, a controversial author. Here is a current edition. I'm very familiar with this book, going back to the 60s. Here's the Ace. This is really a nice paperback. The Ace 25-cent 1954 edition from Ace Books under a different title, Return to Tomorrow. It's the same book. Originally published in 1950 in the pages of Unknown magazine, I've chosen To the Stars as my final, one of my favorite 1950s books. Now, Hubbard is a controversial author, so I'm going to make a statement in a minute about that controversy. But before that, I just wanted to promote the book because it is a great book. It's one of my favorites, and it's about Alan Corday who is shanghaied onto a ship called the Hound of Heaven, and this deals with space and time dilation and how he can travel through time, but while back on Earth, his family and his loved one ages. It's really a heartfelt, riveting tale about a man coming to an awareness on choices and so forth. And it's not a long book at all. I mean, it's it's a quick and easy read, but it's really kind of heavy, dealing with Einstein's theory of relativity. Hubbard was a marvelous writer of adventure stories. The opening line is quite famous: "Space is deep, man is small, and time is his relentless enemy." A great opening hook by L. Ron Hubbard. If you get a chance to read this one. I have always liked it. Great stuff. Now, I chose that because it's very simple. It's one of my favorite books. However, Hubbard, of course, created Scientology, and that lends itself to a different discussion. I want to mention this. A couple things I need to mention. I had an episode about Hubbard's pulp fiction career on this channel, 5 years ago, something like that. And I had to remove it because the hatred that came my way and the abuse by anti-Scientology factions was pretty extreme, including threats, and I also experienced this in person. Now, I'm not a Scientologist. I've looked at it like I've looked at everything else, but I don't join. I've never really joined a religious group. I don't go to any church. I believe in God, and that's my higher power. But that's irrelevant because it's, I'm trying to look at Hubbard objectively. And as a fan of that Pulp Fiction era, he's right there, and it was great. So, I wanted to put that out there, that the abuse is hot and heavy, from various factions there. Now, that does not exempt Scientology from the criticism, of the organization. They have created their own negative reputation. Case in point would be the way they handled the Danny Masterson rape trial. He was guilty. He was found guilty. Those were Scientology attorneys that were defending him, and he still has Scientology attorneys trying to get him a new trial and acquitted. They won't let it go. He was a Scientologist, obviously, and he was guilty as hell. He should die in prison, and they should let it go, but they won't. I was quite familiar and friends, and I consider myself friends with the staff at Galaxy Press. I never discussed Scientology with them. I've been to their office when I was visiting relatives in California. I was invited to one of their events, and I went to the Galaxy Press office. I saw their collection of original pulps and everything. Really incredible. They're great people. I have nothing negative to say about them. I know them all for well over a decade. They're all Scientologists. We discuss fiction. That's a different issue. I don't have trouble with them. I'm just trying to be objective. With Hubbard, it's impossible because this gets in the way, you know. So I'm interested in his career as a writer of adventure stories, but people are so filled with hatred, they're going to come at you. I've experienced that. I've experienced and witnessed people being spit on by the anti-Scientology groups. I've seen firsthand Scientology people not really being very friendly. I do have stories to tell. I'm not going to go into it. I looked into it, you know, because I was wondering, why am I being picked on? Why do people want to spit on me? Why do people want to call me names? It's because I'm promoting Pulp Fiction, of a guy who created an organization that has created its own negative reputation. That's a fact. So, anyways, I wanted to get that out there. You can interpret that in any way you want. I don't care. It's just an unfortunate circumstance that happened. You need to be aware of it if you're going to read Hubbard. You're going to need to be aware that those two groups out there, with both of them, have negative reputations: the anti-people and the Scientology community itself. Which, to me, it's just a shame. But that's life. That's the nature of the beast out there right now. So anyway, that's my statement about that. And that concludes my overview of my favorite 1950s science fiction novels. Really, I hope you'll agree, a diverse group of books. And I'm looking at the time here. This episode is way over long already, so I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you find these books interesting. And we'll take it from there. Up next, I have some interesting things coming your way. In the meantime, please stay well, stay happy, feed your beautiful minds, read a book.